We can wait just a couple of minutes for people to join.
Great, sounds good. Is it Sergei? Is that how you pronounce it?
Sergiu. It's
Sergiu.
Romanian, but also Portuguese. So.
Okay. And you were born in Romania, I assume.
In Moldova.
I love the talent in that part of the world.
It's great, yeah. Very humble, hardworking, grinding. Okay, I see people are joining. Maybe we can start, and then more people will join. Okay, so Pete, thank you for your time. We will record this webinar and then share with our community of tech founders, tech talent around the world. I'm really honored and grateful to have this interview with you. To get started, with all you have done in your life, from being on the founding team of Last Minute, which was acquired for $1 billion plus in cash, and then founding Trulia, being the CEO, exiting the company for 3.5 billion, which is a crazy number at that time, and then investing in dozens of unicorns with NFX. Tell us, just to start, a little bit about your origin story. How did all of this come about?
Sure. Well, great to be here, and excited to have this conversation. So, I guess so. I was born in the UK, and I guess in the, I did physics undergrad, and I did a whole bunch of internships to try and sort of, I think of it like A/B testing my career. Like try something for a summer, and I also needed just to like pay the bills at university. So whole bunch of internships before I graduated from undergrad. And I just, during that time, I really just became fascinated by the internet. And this was in the mid 1990s. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go the traditional, perhaps graduate trainee schemes that were there at the time. I wanted to go straight into internet startups, which in about 1996, I think there were about 17 in the UK, and I emailed them all. And then, one of them offered me an internship and then I, through that process, I met with Brent Hoberman, who is the founder and CEO of lastminute.com. And then when we worked together at another kind of startup, and then when he raised the money to start to pay me a salary and incorporate the company, I joined him and Martha at lastminute.com in my early 20s. And so that was a epic journey, and then was there for 5 years through sort of crazy comedy and going public, and .com crash and September the 11th, and then went to do an MBA at Stanford. And it was there I started Trulia, and then ran that for 10 years.
And after Trulia, how was the idea of NFX? How it started, and maybe
Sure.
walk us a little bit through the investment processes you guys do, and
yeah. So NFX, we started in probably about 2015, just after Zillow, just around the time that Zillow and Trulia merged, and then we started our kind of seed fund in 2017, and the experience, and there are 3 founding partners: myself, James Courier, and Gigi Levi-Weiss, and we all have a similar background in terms of founding companies, in terms of investing in companies as angels, and being executives in companies. And so, but we had this sort of consistent thesis, which is network effects. And so in the same way and that's really where the name comes from. NFX. And so you saw my background at European travel marketplace, a US real estate marketplace. Gigi had done a bunch of things in gaming networks and platforms and many other things in B2B. James had done half a dozen startups by that point, a range of different areas. And so we just had this like fascination with network effects, which if you go back in history, something like 80% of the value that gets created in technology companies is driven by companies that have strong network effects. And we know them, whether that's Uber and Airbnb, or even the Microsoft operating system or Apple's iOS operating system, the platforms, marketplace. And so like the realization is that, well, if you're going to invest in companies and build big businesses, the best ones are going to be ones that have network effects because they're incredibly defensible. And so we started the firm with that thesis. And so we invest in many, many different sectors, not just marketplaces, but invest in many sectors from space to prop tech to fintech to many areas. And we really look for companies that have the either network effects day one, which is what you'd see in marketplaces, or the potential to add network effects later on. And our focus as a fund is really at the earliest stage. So we typically invest at pre-seed or seed, is where we're most active.
Very interesting. And what is the criteria that you choose a startup to invest in? And I'm curious if that criteria changed over time.
Yeah, so I think it's the stage we're investing in is a pre-seed and seed is I kind of there's really sort of three different kind of buckets you look at. So one is the team, the other is the market, the other is the kind of the product and metrics and so forth. And overwhelmingly it's the team. That's the kind of the number one thing for us because a remarkable team with a remarkable insight and capability is really what makes startups successful and it separates them. That's number one. Secondly is the market, which is really important. I'm sure the founders have, and you've heard people say many times, a great team in a bad market is just really tough, but an okay team in a great market is, can do really well. And so it's, and obviously a great team picks a great market. And so it's really about, the second point is understand the market. And the third component is the product. And the product can evolve and change and kind of often does. And so that's why it's a little bit more fungible in terms of as we think about it. And then as we think about today, in 2024, the AI is really the technology catalyst is going to open up a whole bunch of different opportunities. And so I would say probably 80% of what we're doing right now has some element of AI, and that may be a sort of a very a light use of AI that just helps to grease the wheels of whatever they're doing, or it may be completely AI native and AI first, and that this is sort of completely impossible to do without using AI.
We wanted to focus this conversation on AI specific.
Yeah.
And speaking about that, you wrote this article in November on NFX blog, very interesting one about AI spectrum for founders. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in AI? What industries are maybe perhaps ready for startups to focus on right now?
Yeah. So I think it's so fluid right now, and so it's like I think there's sort of like the public fascination with AI has been long-standing, but it's like the ChatGPT moment really turned it in the public consciousness and founders consciousness, and with the APIs and software tools that really opened things up. So, I'd really kind of think about it in a sort of couple of different areas. So that, and the opportunities right now. So one is that, I think every startup, whether you're founded this year or whether you were founded 5, 10 years ago, is thinking about how do they incorporate AI into their business. And no one's asleep. No one's realizing this is not going to have an impact on every technology startup. So everyone's thinking about it, and I think for existing companies and marketplaces and businesses, they're incorporating it in different ways. Often, there's for marketplace specifically, is often it's one is to improve efficiency in their internal operations broadly. So whether that's reducing customer service costs, whether that is improving software development, productivity, reducing the need to using AI tools to help them to simplify their finance department or legal department. But probably for marketplace, I think that's sort of two of the other bigger areas around how do you decrease the cost and increase the engagement on the supply and demand, because marketplaces critically it just depend on this. How do you're almost running two businesses at the same time. How do you aggregate supply and demand at the same time and facilitate matching? So there's a lot of productivity improvements in matching those businesses, matching the supply and demand portion, and then other kind of lightweight product improvements. But that's the sort of the basics. And so if you think of this sort of AI spectrum, that's sort of, this is a kind of the most simplistic level of that of that spectrum. I guess the other end of that spectrum is where companies are building products that just couldn't exist without AI. And this is probably where the most interesting stuff is happening right now. And companies are and teams are starting companies in this general space. So, and there's a couple of perhaps more interesting areas in that category. One of them is the opportunity for startups to go after industries that really haven't to date been dramatically touched by technology or digital processes. They may be lightly touched, but not transformed. These are can often be knowledge worker areas. They could be more kind of complex or regulated areas, and where there's sort of there's an inherent friction and challenges around the industry, which just makes it hard for digital companies to really transform them. But with AI, you can really create a dramatically better product experience that overcomes that internal friction within the industry. So, that could be in construction and architecture. It could be in legal. It could be in healthcare. It could be in government. Industries which, don't lend themselves too well to traditional automation, but AI-enabled automation can unlock real value. And so that's a bunch of the kind of more interesting stuff. And I think we've seen mostly in the last 6 months, where we've seen founders that have found these particular niches of industries, which have been relatively untouched, and they deeply understand that industry, but mostly B2B. And then they combine that with capabilities enabled by these new AI services, where they've really can create these breakthrough products, and that enables them to create a wedge into that market and potentially take a significant portion of that market. So that's one area. I guess the third area is probably around consumer and how AI is going to transform consumer. And it takes, if you look back through the mobile revolution, it took a while for people to really understand the the use cases and product experience and capabilities of that device. And I think people are starting to kind of to interpret the opportunities with AI, and it's not like AI is done. It's improving at a dramatic rate and getting cheaper. And so I think this is gonna be a massive tailwind over the next 5 years, where a lot of interesting things are gonna happen. That things perhaps today are impossible, but in 2 years they will be possible. And particularly in things like computer vision, where the technology is quite expensive today, but is going to get incredibly cheap really quickly. And then also in thinking about the workflows around that as well. I think as founders are able to kind of understand the workflows or consumer experiences in a chat interface is a good way to illustrate the technology. But for many applications, it's it's not going to be the typical interface that people will use.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's this AI revolution. It's a lot of opportunities for founders. And speaking about that, in terms of the formation of new startups and teams is
Yeah.
changing in this AI age. How do you see the startup advantage and the incumbents in AI, the Microsoft of the world? And
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
it's the common question from as within the startup ecosystem is who's going to benefit from the AI revolution? Is it going to be the incumbents or is it going to be startups? And if you look back at the mobile era as a parallel, it's like the big winners were really Google, Apple, and Facebook. They were the incumbents in terms of just, they accelerated their market cap dramatically through that period. But at the same time, thousands of startups were created and apps were created that also, did incredibly well. Whether that is, Instagram or WhatsApp before they were acquired, whether that's Uber, Airbnb is was very one, and really all these startups were created that just couldn't exist before. Doordash, so many companies were successful, and so I think the same thing is going to happen this time around as well. The incumbents are going to really benefit because they have the data, the distribution, the talent, and the capital to invest in this stuff. So if you're if you're Zillow, then you're going to be using AI to kind of to help to sort of protect your moat that you already have in your business. Same with other businesses and other marketplaces. I'm sure Uber is doing the same. It's not a pure AI company, but they're going to use AI to kind of protect their moat and scale their business and be better at matching. But then you're going to create a whole bunch of other startups, which we generally think about the opportunities there. One is in this realm of kind of like where there's no digital incumbent, no digital incumbent, which so it's a general sort of greenfield opportunity. And then startups who are focused on industries that are pretty slow moving. There may be a digital incumbent, but they're just slow. And I think you can still create a path that disrupts some of these incumbents that are then incredibly slow. And there's also niches of businesses which AI can be particularly good at attacking and transforming, which you think of these horizontal businesses like sales or marketing, you may be able to find elements of them which you can use AI to kind of capture a piece of that industry and then potentially expand into many other areas of that industry. So, that could be I don't think companies like Salesforce.com are easily disrupted, but it's feasible that AI will automate the role of sales reps, and there's many companies going after kind of automated sales reps or elements of that. And so does that could that create a wedge into a kind of bigger CRM and essentially capture most of the value of that, rather than paying whatever $100 a month per salesperson to Salesforce, could salesperson make $10,000? Like, can you be, are there going to be startups that capture the value in that way? And so it's there is, while I think incumbents are not asleep at the wheel, there is a bunch of opportunity for startups to 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 create wedges into these bigger markets and then disrupt them more broadly as well.
Yes, and it's interesting if you look to the P&L of a company, like the software spend is just a, a small percentage of that, but the people cost is the highest on the P&L.
Yeah.
And then if you automate a salesperson rep, you just open a new market for charging and for kind of expanding and becoming a bigger part of the P&L of that company rather than staying within the SaaS kind of play.
Yeah, we published a piece
Mm.
a few weeks ago, which was really about um, the the services layer within organizations, and it's like, like you said, you spend some money on software, but you spend more money on people and services and labor, and I think it's a really interesting market, and we're seeing and investing in companies that are both vertically focused on that. They're almost sort of AI AI vertically integrated services companies, um, which have a lot of technology, but also a few people as well. You can imagine law firms or accountancy firms or kind of other firms doing, you know, they're encumbered because of their business model and their labor to kind of to automate the role of people, but a new startup could probably be more effective in that area. But they're really, vertically integrated, solving this specific problem. And then there's also horizontal opportunities where they're providing technology that enables a bunch of opportunities, enable a bunch of businesses, whether those are enterprises or SMBs, to to use technology to improve the efficiency of their operations, and to replace a bunch of the workers that they might have, or rather make those workers much more efficient. And so the salesperson is not, selling uh, one deal a week, but they're making one deal a day.
And speaking about AI first marketplace, what do you think? I'm curious. What do you think the role of Gen AI should be for the business uh, in to create this more network effects? Maybe you touched a little bit. Maybe we can go into more details of solving this chicken and egg problems. If you see any
Yeah.
examples of marketplaces that are doing quite good at this time that you could share.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, just take a step back in marketplaces. So if you think about the sort of evolution of marketplaces, I mean, they create enormous economic value through this matching process, and they have incredible sort of defensibility through their network effects. And so, if you can find them, they're terrific businesses. But they're also incredibly hard because you're kind of building two businesses at the same time. And I would say that, you know, over the last several years, there's been probably less pure marketplaces that have sort of caught on. And I think part of the reason for that is that the a lot of the big verticals have been captured. Um, whether they've been, whether this is hospitality or transportation, a lot of these, real estate, travel, have been captured and they've incredibly defensible. Um, and the And then there's the sort of long tail of kind of perhaps smaller verticals, which quite frankly, I think have been the ad networks, which, Meta and Google actually do a great job of matching. If I'm, a Shopify seller who's selling t-shirts, like, you can, the targeting capabilities are so good that you don't need to spin up a dedicated marketplace. sellers can literally just kind of to advertise on these platforms. And so the long tail is harder for them to get liquidity. So pure play marketplaces, I think, are just more challenging um, in this era. And so what's required is something that really just goes beyond matching. And I think what we're seeing um, a lot of sort of companies that aspire to be AI first marketplaces are really incorporating AI tools into transforming the demand side or supply side. So let me break that down a little bit. So on the demand side, you could have a tool which there's a company in our portfolio called Tailorbird, which is focused on the renovation industry for multifamily buildings. That's their initial market. So you can imagine a big apartment building. Every 10 years, they need to transform their kitchens and bathrooms. And this company essentially takes pictures, that they're supplied by the company or other imagery, and turns that into architectural drawings, and then bids out into a marketplace where they can actually get this work done. So you turn a 6-week process into a 2-week process, and save a bunch of time and money by doing that process. And so the demand side wedge is just this amazing piece of computer vision technology that figures out, okay, from these pictures, I understand all the dimensions, I understand a bunch of the material, not 100%, but to kind of a very high degree of kind of to initial accuracy that's then manually reviewed. And so that's initial wedge I like to spin up this marketplace. That would be one piece. On the supply side, we're seeing a bunch of B2B marketplaces. You could think of them as more procurement marketplaces, which are which essentially kind of aggregate a huge bunch of unstructured data about particular vendors, terms, availability, the capability of products that work with each other. This huge amount of structured data kind of simplify the procurement process. And procurement spend in almost any organization is enormous, and in all these different industries. And so that's a path to kind of acquire a bunch of the supply using by building up a proprietary amount of data and supplies and facilitating that process. So those are two examples which would be impossible without AI in today's environment. I think there's another component around kind of AI, which I think is I think we will start to kind of rethink the notion of matching in the search box. I think I think people have kind of in tune to kind of have a search box, see results, pick a result, and then proceed down the transaction. I think you're gonna and that's a sort of one transactional process. I think you can see where startups are actually going to take a lot more complicated process that may even look more like an ERP service, and start to really think about an end-to-end experience, which is less about sort of find a particular product in the marketplace, but really transform an entire process using automation. And the matching piece is just a small sliver of what they're doing, but they're taking the entire process end to end and transforming it.
It's interesting. And particularly to labor marketplaces, would you say that generative AI can improve, or perhaps maybe you saw any improvement in terms of the recommender to reduce the friction of the maybe finding the labor, the talent, and transacting and matching, and then transacting on the marketplace? Or would you say that maybe the AI recommender it's polluting the marketplace with non-human kind of requirements, explanations, or maybe
Yeah.
you see something different in a talent, labor intensive maybe marketplace?
Well, there's I think it will impact labor marketplaces in a bunch of different ways, and labor in general. I think there's definitely an area where labor is going to be replaced by people. You could think of kind of, whether these are therapists, which an AI may act as a better therapist than humans, certainly cheaper and more available. Um, and so that could be an area where, opens up the market massively. I don't know if it will necessarily reduce the number of therapists. I actually think it might increase the number of therapists. Um, but it just gives accessibility to kind of to that profession, which requires a high level of training. And there are a bunch of industries where that could happen, copywriting and logo creation. There's that's a bunch of stuff that could be automated in that area, which is interesting. Um, the other the other areas where we see kind of labor marketplaces being potentially changed is where you start to increase the productivity of that existing marketplace. So that existing labor pool. So in any job, there's typically a bunch of stuff that is quite tedious and painful. When you see, there's software for architects, which is AI enabled. It could be software for designers that's AI enabled. I think um, you could probably see a bunch of elements within labor marketplaces like Fiverr where their workers, there may be competition which reduces the amount they could take, but their productivity increases using these tools, so the actual net earnings increase. And so there's a bunch of opportunity in that area. So there's sort of autopilots and then co-pilots. Um, and then I think the other piece is probably about training and professional development. And if if you take the sort of negative view of AI in our economy as like, that it's going to put all these people out of work, and it's going to be a disaster. And you know, you're going to have highly skilled people that just have no employment opportunity. I, 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 I'm there won't be zero examples of that, but I think there will be fewer than people expect. Um, because I think, in any job, like I said, there's a bunch of stuff that you do which is unproductive. You could just focus on the higher value stuff, um, which turn people from less transactional into more strategic, which I think is going to be helpful. But also, I think one of the great gifts of AI is in edtech. I mean, and edtech's a hard category, but professional education, if you can have a professional coach or tutor, if you want to transform from being a uh, I don't know, rather than being a sort of rather than being an accountant, which just audits things, you want to become a strategic finance partner to someone, you need to develop a bunch of different skills. And, and some of those skills can be learned. And I think AI is going to dramatically increase the availability of those tools and that education in a very personalized way, to help people to learn these different skills that they're able to adopt, and then hopefully have more happier lives, and increase their earnings as well.
Cool, nice. I have two more questions, and then we can open for public, for people that join us today. Um, I wanted to touch a little bit about the largest asset class, real estate, um, and specifically relating to maybe Truly experience, but beyond that, what is real estate 3.0, and how do you see AI impacting the future of real estate, or what kind of business ideas or startups can be created in this new kind of real estate
Sure.
3.0?
So I wrote a piece a couple of years ago that really sort of laid out the evolution of kind of online real estate world. And so real estate 1.0 is really about unlocking information. So, the role of Trulia and Zillow back 20 years ago was really about the access to information, previously had been sort of locked away in MLSs, in county sort of record offices, and kind of making that available to everyone. So that, and that, all over the world, there are businesses like that that help access that information. Real estate 2.0 is really changing the transaction. And so it's like, people are, have access to information, but they still have to, get, sign a bunch of forms, go to the bank, get all the paperwork, a whole sort of the clunky process and painful processes hasn't really improved substantially. And so I would say we're generally in that kind of process now. And the we're generally kind of in that process now, where we're improving the transaction in certain different ways, whether that's financing or whether that's other areas. And then the third area, which we see is sort of coming around the corner, is real estate 3.0, which is really changing the kind of notion of ownership. And there are some parallels a little bit to Web3, where it's like read, write, own, is one of the kind of the ways that people think about it. But it's also, I think, the sort of the kind of monolithic structures of real estate, which is mortgages and kind of financing and long-term ownership, I think, are changing with our society. So you're starting to see areas around the edges in this industry, which are starting to kind of elements of this real estate 3.0 strategy. So I think this is, we're still in 2.0, but I would say over the next kind of like 10 years, we might start to see some interesting models around how the nature of ownership changes within real estate.
Interesting. And in terms of your investments at NFX, can you share any recent companies that any examples that were excites you right now, and maybe from the past any not so well, or maybe worst investments you did, and do you have any anecdotes or any stories related to those experiences that founders can learn from?
A lot of, I mean, it's hard to pick favorites. And so it's hard to kind of like pinpoint specific companies in that area. So there's many companies that we're active in. So we have more than 100 portfolio companies. And so, and then lessons, I think it's, I think there's a whole bunch of lessons. One thing that I think as we think over the last couple of years, we've had so many changes, right? With COVID, with sort of the interest rate changes, it's been kind of brutal for founders out there. And it's, and watching the companies that have succeeded and the ones that have had kind of more challenges, I'd say there's probably a couple of different themes that we've seen in over the last couple of years of companies that successfully navigated these challenges. Obviously the ability to kind of to move incredibly quickly is critical. I think when we speak to founders, it's like trying to understand the proxy for speed is everything. And in an AI world, speed is just critical because things are changing so quickly and so many things are quite obvious. And so the ability to execute quickly is really separates those companies that have done things well and those that have had more challenges. I'm, as an investor and kind of former founder and operator, I'm particularly keen on the efficient distribution and go to market, and how to be effective there. A lot of companies are just upside down economics, bad contribution margins, but companies that have had really efficient and smart go to market, the figure out distribution, are just particularly interesting. to me, and that's just a novel idea. Hiring a bunch of salespeople and grinding it out is not typically doesn't build typically great businesses in any category. But these insights or product features that enable that are have really separated a bunch of the successful companies and those that are less successful.
Thank you. Very useful insights. Um, I'm going to go with the questions we have in the
Okay.
chat. So Michelle is asking Pete, thanks a lot for all of this interesting insights. I have a question. What role does data play in the success of an AI first marketplace? And how should companies, startups approach the data management and their strategies?
Uh, I mean I think it plays a huge role. I think there's I guess I'd think about it in two ways. Like one is just that if you're competing against an incumbent marketplace or you're starting a kind of like a um, a sort of in a vanilla in a sort of greenfield opportunity. I think for the existing startups, one thing that so the startups that focus on more existing markets or competitive environments, um, you can see situations where the incumbent is thinking about things perhaps in a black and white way, and you're thinking about things in a color way. And so the data structures and processes that they've been using are just um, prehistoric, and they just they don't have the data, um, and they don't have these sort of data structures and organization to be able to do things in a kind of modern or beneficial way. And it's almost you could see it, one sort of example might be it's not classically a marketplace. It's not a marketplace, but you think about this in self-driving cars. There's like, with the belief that you'd have to have all this LiDAR versus cameras, and cameras are actually doing a good job with AI compared to LiDAR, which was like very sort of rules-based learning structure. Um, so and there may be opportunity for startups which perhaps have less data than the incumbents, but looking at the world in a different way to beat out those incumbents. The other piece is just being, in terms of more greenfield opportunities, is just aggregating as much data as possible, and storing that data and using that data to kind of do all sorts of different matching and capability. And the whether that's unstructured or structured data. So if you're able to figure out a tool which perhaps hoovers up an enormous amount of data and provides some utility out of that may be an initial tool which you can use that to lock in one element of the supply or demand side. And so there's, we see a bunch of companies doing that, whether it's computer vision, whether that is going through large volumes of documents in an enterprise, whether it's going through individuals' emails, obviously with permission, to be able to kind of take out conversations and business processes. There's a whole bunch of opportunities there.
Victor is asking, related to real estate, what is your view over the interaction between AI and ECG, considering the emergence of smart buildings, and whatever there are any startups, or if you see any uptick in startup numbers in this area?
Yeah, so within the kind of like more commercial real estate sector, there's a lot of regulation coming in, which is kind of forcing um, uh, buildings and new construction to reduce their carbon footprint. And I forget exactly kind of the timing and the geographies, but I know that New York and California have kind of enacted some regulation here, and so there's a bunch of different startups focus on this, which are we often think about when is the right time to start this company, and if you've got AI which can analyze perhaps the carbon footprint of one construction mode versus another, or the carbon footprint of an existing building, using AI, which is computationally complex, um, and and you've got this sort of catalyst, which is like regulation requires certain changes, then that creates the opportunity for these startups. So we see a lot of different startups in this area that are focused on this problem. I think the one, that as we think about this category and then also other other categories as well, particularly in SaaS, is really trying to think through what is the entry point for that business. For instance, if you're in a the technology to do this is non-trivial, but there's many companies going after. And so if you're at the early stage of this, if your software is at the early stage of this process, you're able to monetize and not be disintermediated later on. So you want to be mindful of kind of where you are in the process. We see some startups that are perhaps doing something at the end of using other people's data, which makes them somewhat vulnerable to disruption, as opposed to perhaps being early on in the process, which makes them less vulnerable. And if they're earlier on, you also have more monetization opportunities as well.
Makes sense, yeah. And the next question from Mihai: how do you balance the need for AI innovation with the necessity to keep the user privacy and data security?
Got it. So I imagine the question is sort of referring to the scenario where you can have, and there's a number of companies which are using enterprise data to kind of to make decisions at the corporate level. So, it could be an example where someone is, if there's enterprise search engines, which we've made an investment in a company called Akuda in this area, which enables people to provide enterprise search within the organization. So they integrate with a whole bunch of apps, whether that's Slack or whether that's the G Suite, Atlassian and others, and so can analyze activity that's going on within the organization. And they've built elements into that which manage the permissions depending on the user. So I can't find out the salary of my colleague as a individual, but if I'm the CFO, then I could find out that information on the salary of particular employees. And so I think founders are very mindful about this right now, and I think the company is necessary to go in. Plus, a lot of the regulation that's come in from SOC 2 and others around security is kind of pretty well established right now. So I don't think this is particularly an AI problem, but the existing regulations and rules, the existing regulation and rules kind of manage this stuff as well. Just one thing to add on Akuda, what they do is actually as it's somewhat related, is that they don't create replicas of this data for kind of accuracy and security purposes. And so companies are figuring out, if I'm going to be successful, and I don't necessarily want to hold local copies of this information, which creates data privacy and data security challenges. And so it's not every company that is doing that, but kind of the most sophisticated ones are very mindful about this.
So I asked ChatGPT a question. I asked,
Okay.
I'm interviewing Pete Flint, ask him a personal question. What would you ask? And the ChatGPT told me, Pete, you have had a remarkable career from co-founding and leading Trulia to becoming a partner at NFX. Reflecting on your journey, what personal experiences or mentors have had the most significant impact on your approach to leadership and entrepreneurship?
Okay. Who has had the most impact? I probably like say two folks. So one is I put them as well, but Brent and Martha from lastminute.com, they were kind of early kind of bosses and mentors of mine, and they remain great friends today. And so that, they, really, I think many things I learned from them, but one of them specifically was just um, the requirement in a startup to be able, and the opportunity in a startup to find creative solutions to practically any problem. Um, and there were tons of kind of near death experiences at last minute, which were like we would just figure things out and just like, and nothing was impossible. Many things were incredibly hard, but we always found a way, and just kind of that creativity, creative problem solving, and grit and perseverance, resilience, whatever you call it. It's like, we kind of figured out stuff, which I think, having been through that and kind of seeing how um seeing opportunities that creates, just sort of gives you a whole lot of confidence that you can do many, many things. So that'd be Brent and Martha. The other person that comes to mind is a guy called Andy Ratcliffe, who was um, my professor and mentor at Stanford when I was starting and running the business plan for Trulia. And he was a founding general partner at Benchmark Capital, and then when I met him, he just left that, and just became a professor at Stanford, and he was my mentor when I was writing the initial business plan for Trulia. And so there's a lot of different stuff that I've learned from him over the years, from kind of like how to create a terrific venture firm, um, to kind of really thinking about the product, and simplicity, and how do you just really create these breakthrough product experiences at Trulia. So those are two folks that absolutely have made an incredible impact, and they're both remarkable, remarkably successful business people, and great people as well.
Thank you, Pete. I think we've finished the interview. I see one more question actually from Elena. So Elena is asking what, and we'll finish after that. I think we're on time. Got a couple of more minutes, but Elena is asking, what tools and strategies did you use to increase speed of execution as a founder? It's a good question.
A bunch of different things. I think there's uh one is just to try to decentralize decision making. And I think the early days, perhaps at Trulia, one where I sort of focused on a sort of a path that was unknown, kind of was quite a sort of like tops down company, and trying to create this sort of build a company and build a product that just didn't exist in the market. And so we were very sort of, okay, we didn't decentralize decision, we were very centralized decision making. But later on, once the problem gets set was much broader, we kind of massively decentralized decision making, empowered individuals. Teams knew their mission, their KPIs, their resources, and just get on with doing things. And we really unlocked kind of speed and empowered people to make decisions. Um, the the other tactics is just being high levels of instrumentation, and kind of and identity and sharing metrics across the organization, and having a really tight kind of like time frame about, okay, we want to achieve this result by this date. The bigger the projects would just be slow, but making small improvements every single day or every single week, and having kind of massive instrumentation so that everyone has access to the information, really can speed up decision making. But the final one that I see a lot is almost having like, it's like having a sort of decision of last resort, like if which is like, rather than putting off kind of tough decisions or tough conversations, you have those kind of more frequently. It's sometimes called like, oh, the screw it or F it. Which like, we just got to do this. And you kind of know in your heart and heart you've been putting off, but just like having the environment or culture where you're just like, okay, we just got to do this. We know it's the right thing. We know it's hard, but we just got to do it. And being open to this conversation as well can really help.
Thank you, Pete. It was great to interview.
Great.
A lot of insights. I appreciate your time. Thank you everyone attending, and we'll be posting this online for those that miss it. But I hope you have a great time, a great day ahead of you, and looking forward to meet at the future events and
That's great.
opportunities. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thank you, Pete.
Have a good rest of the
Great
day.
to see you.